On July 22nd of this year, the University of Otago, New Zealand's oldest university, published the results of a study entitled Multiple Aspects of Sexual Orientation, Prevalence and Sociodemographic Correlates in a New Zealand National Survey. According to the university's press release, homosexuals, bisexuals, and those who identify as heterosexual but who have had same-sex encounters are more likely to have experienced negative events in childhood. The question over whether homosexuals are born or made is an ongoing debate, and linking homosexuality to adverse childhood events is not a new endeavor. It has been the subject of several studies. This video will examine the New Zealand study by Research Associate Professor Elizabeth Wells and her research team. The study was based on the New Zealand Mental Health Survey, which was part of the World Mental Health Survey initiative. Additional questions were added in multiple areas, including sexual experience and sexual relationships with a partner of the same sex. The study involved approximately 13,000 New Zealanders aged 16 and older who were interviewed face-to-face using the computer-assisted personal interview method, also known as CAPI. When asked about their sexual identity, the group responded 98% heterosexual, 0.6% bisexual, 0.8% homosexual, 0.3% something else, and 0.1% not sure. When asked about same-sex behavior with a partner, the group responded 1.9% had had same-sex sexual experience and relationship, and 3.2% had a same-sex sexual experience with no relationship. Some of those who identified themselves as heterosexual admitted to having same-sex sexual relations and/or experiences. Additionally, some who identified themselves as either bisexual or homosexual did not have any same-sex sexual relationships or same-sex sexual experience. There appears to have been some confusion on a few of the questions, as 14 participants reported a same-sex sexual relationship, but not a same-sex sexual experience. Because of the inconsistency, these 14 participants were removed from subsequent analysis, as were those who answered something else or not sure when asked about their sexual identity. Since same-sex sexual experience and/or relationship encompass some identified as heterosexual, the study created 5 groups: heterosexual, no same-sex sexual behavior; heterosexual, same-sex sexual experience only; heterosexual, both same-sex sexual experience and relationship; bisexual; and homosexual. Any participant who had ever experienced depression or anxiety disorders, hospital treatment for mental problems, or made a suicide plan or attempt, along with a random selection of other participants, were asked the post-traumatic stress disorder questions. The post-traumatic stress disorder section asked each participant if he or she had experienced each of 29 types of adverse events, and if so, the age of each occurrence. For participants who experienced an adverse event prior to age 16, 4 individual types of adverse events were investigated. These were being badly beaten by a parent or parent figure, witnessing other violence at home, sexual assault, and rape. Of these 4 events, both rape and sexual assault prior to age 16 were strongly associated with belonging to any of the non-exclusively heterosexual groups. If you are part of the religious right, don't get too excited about the outcome of this study, as I think it's important to discuss a few of its problems and shortcomings. First of all, the data collection method used. Because the study was based on data gathered through the New Zealand Mental Health Survey, it was collected through a face-to-face interview. It is widely known that when it comes to sensitive information, this method of collection often yields inaccurate data. Individuals are less likely to reveal personal information about themselves, especially regarding things that society might look down on. Now, even though homosexuality is more generally accepted today than, say, 20 years ago, there is still a stigma associated with it. Because of this, there is reason to believe that not everyone was honest when answering the questions regarding their sexual identity and behavior. This seems to be supported by the fact that only 0.8% of the individuals in the survey acknowledge being homosexual. This figure is low compared to other surveys taken, especially one by the Center for Disease Control in 2005. The CDC survey reported that 2.3% of U.S. men and 1.3% of women identified themselves as homosexual. In addition to feeling uncomfortable acknowledging same-sex behavior in a face-to-face interview, some individuals might have felt uncomfortable acknowledging rape or sexual assault. If this is the case, it seems reasonable that those individuals who are willing to share information regarding non-heterosexual behavior might also be more willing to share details regarding adverse childhood events such as rape and sexual assault. This would definitely skew the results. The second problem with the study is that it appears to have some built-in bias in it. It seems to imply that if someone isn't heterosexual, then something is wrong and must have caused it. This bias may best be demonstrated by a quote from Research Associate Professor Elizabeth Wells. In an interview, Wells said, "I suspect there might be some gay and lesbian people who are indignant, but it is not my intention to anger them. You could say that if someone was sexually abused as a child, chooses to live as a homosexual, and lives life well, then that is not a bad thing. But if they are living a homosexual life and regretting it, that is another matter." I'd like to focus on one section of her quote. If someone was sexually abused as a child, chooses to live as a homosexual. To Wells, it appears that homosexuality is a choice to some event in a person's life. It isn't normal for someone to be homosexual, so, to Wells, something must have caused it. The third problem I'd like to discuss may not be a problem of the study per se, but a problem in its interpretation and application. And that is, correlation doesn't imply causation. Even if there is correlation between non-heterosexual behavior and sexual abuse, there is not enough evidence to assume causation. Correlation doesn't imply causation is a statement that we often hear, but one which I don't believe we always understand or apply. Our minds are built in such a way that we try to establish links between many contrasting pieces of information. Our brains will often try to construct patterns from randomness, and when a pattern is found, we often jump to a conclusion. Critical thinking involves overcoming this tendency to make hasty generalizations. The ability to carefully and accurately evaluate information is crucial, especially in the areas of science and academia. The best way to understand the correlation-causation problem is to consider an example. As part of a survey, a group of teenagers were asked about their behavior and whether or not their parents smoked. Because the findings of the survey seemed to show a correlation between teenage delinquent behavior and parents who smoke, a British newspaper wrote an article on the subject entitled, "Smokers' Kids Are Yobs." For those who don't know, a yob is British slang for a hooligan. Additionally, the professor who led the investigation wanted cigarette packets to carry a warning about the social impacts of smoking. A problem with assuming that correlation means causation is that they can often work in reverse. For instance, it is perfectly plausible that parents smoked because of the stress they felt by dealing with delinquent children. Another interpretation may be that social class caused the correlation. For instance, lower classes are usually more likely to smoke and also are more likely to have delinquent children. Therefore, parental smoking and delinquency could be symptoms of poverty and may not be directly related to each other. When interpreting the results of the New Zealand study, one could just as easily come to the conclusion that sexual abuse doesn't cause same-sex behavior, but that those who go on to same-sex behavior or attraction have characteristics, even in childhood, that make them more likely to be victims of sexual abuse. In fact, this hypothesis may actually fit better with the results of this study, as the vast majority of individuals who reported being sexually assaulted or raped were individuals with no same-sex behavior. Additionally, less than 15% of those who reported same-sex behavior were sexually assaulted or raped. The point I would like all of you to take away from this video is that we must never jump to conclusions when we hear of studies like that performed in New Zealand. Before we can reach a conclusion, we must carefully and accurately review the information. And we can't always rely on others to do this for us. We must be willing to get our hands dirty from time to time. Before we know if there is truly a causal relationship between non-heterosexual behavior and sexual abuse, more research must be performed. Future studies must go into more depth regarding the details behind the events of sexual assault and rape. For instance, was the victim targeted because he or she was seen as different? If indeed children who go on to same-sex attraction or behavior are being targeted, we need to find better ways to protect them. Thanks for listening.